Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I give a very brief history of sports cards. This is for people who want to understand basically what happened in cards, understand the very basic layout of cards over time, but don't really want to go into the depths of understanding in detail, which, let's face it, from what I've been doing this for 30 years and I'm still learning a lot, so I can understand if you want just an easy little breeze through. And that's what I want to do. I want to spend about 10 minutes and tell you pretty much the points you need to know. So it's going to be very brief, and I may actually miss one or two little points just for the sake of getting through this as quickly as I can. So, 10 minutes, let's see what we can learn in 10 minutes. Basically, card collecting is broken down into four distinct eras. You can argue about different names and you can talk endlessly about periods if you want, but for the most part, it's four different eras. There's the pre-war era, there's the post-war era or the early modern era, and these two eras are pretty much the vintage era of cards. Then we have the 90s. Really no other name to give it. It's kind of like if you're talking about movies and you say the 80s, that's all you need to say. The 90s is about as distinctive of a name as you need to say for that period. Just, yeah, it's that simple. And then you have the new millennium or the current era of cards. We'll come up with a name for it at some point when we understand what in the world has been going on, which has been kind of a big lot of nothing. We'll get to that in a minute. So cards started off in the 1800s, and it basically worked in the world of tobacco, specifically early cigarettes. Now, early cigarettes didn't come in the same packaging that we're used to today. It was a softer package. Think of, say, Wrigley's gum. Now, in a pack of gum, the gum itself is very rigid, so it holds up the pack. That wasn't the case with cigarettes. So they would put little cardboard fillers in there, which you could print anything on. It's just a piece of cardboard. So they'd print ads and they'd print pictures, and some of those pictures included baseball players and boxers. So that was where cards basically started from. And all the way through the 1800s, for the most part, that was cards. Not entirely, but for the association was strong enough that they didn't need to come in those packs. You could actually find them in tins as well. So it was kind of a synonymous affair. Cards and tobacco were just kind of the same thing, and that's why we know them as tobacco cards. That was basically the way that it worked up until about World War I. But by World War I, we were starting to see some changes in our culture. There was a new market that was evolving for kids, a confectionery market. And so their kids were starting to be catered to by companies that were selling things like Cracker Jacks being the most famous. Cracker Jacks caramel corn happened to include prizes inside. So kids would buy it for the caramel corn, but they'd also buy it for the prize. Well, another thing that was happening about this time was the innovation of gum. Technology was now allowing us to have gum in a better form than it had been in the past. And so, likewise, gum was becoming more of a market for kids. And companies like Bazooka very famously would add little comics to entice kids in the same way that Cracker Jack's prizes worked. Well, other companies actually started to use baseball cards. So by the time World War II came around, cards were no longer tobacco cards, they were becoming bubblegum cards. That distinction was partially strong from the fact that bubblegum companies were starting to make very standardized sets where year after year after year there was some reliability about that. So now you have a whole market that's really well defined, and then guess what? A big war breaks out in Europe, and the US government rationed everything, including paper. And for reasons I'll never understand, they did not consider baseball cards to be a part of the cause. So they stopped all of that, and then a very contagious case of peace broke out in Europe, and we were eventually able to get back to cards. Not right away. So in 1948, Leaf and Bowman both got back into the market of making cards, and they would, well, Bowman at least, would continue this moving forward. But it was a little upstart company called Topps in the early 50s that really shook things up. In their second set, they made a card that was basically, it was something we hadn't really seen before. On the front, it had a picture and it had a name. Okay, we're used to that. But on the back, it had biographical information, and it had a lot of information on the back. It even had box scores. I mean, the amount of stuff that it had on this card was really quite impressive. So why were they able to put all this on there that nobody else had? Well, the card was really big. And in fact, that became the standard, and Bowman would make a bigger card too, so that would be the expectation. If you were going to make a card, it better be like this. And a few years later, Topps would slightly scale it back to a dimension that is what we know as the official card size today. So in the 1950s, Topps made the two innovations that defined cards moving forward. And part of the reason they were able to define it so effectively was they created a monopoly on cards. Now, Parkhurst and hockey had a pretty good run well into the 1960s, and Bowman lasted for a little bit, but Topps bought them and kind of brought them into the fold. And we saw a few years from Fleer, a few years from Philadelphia, but for the most part, through the entirety of the 60s and 70s, Topps made all cards. And that meant that they just basically completely defined what we knew cards to be. By 1981, Fleer was able to get back into cards, and Donruss was able to join in too. So now we had three cards, but they were still making pretty much the same cards that Topps was making. The card stock was a little bit different, but other than that, it was basically the same stuff. That was until 1988. And in 88, we saw a new brand called Score that came onto the scene. And where Score was most distinctive was the fact that the card stock itself wasn't really cardboard, it was a card stock. It was a very firm pressed card stock where on the back you could print full color, high detail, you could really cram a lot of information on there. The cards looked, to an extent, great. The card would need to be cleaned up in years later, but what it showed was the potential that all cards would have. Among other things, because it wasn't a fluffy cardboard, it held up a lot better. Till it failed, it would fail spectacularly when it did. But for the most part, this was a level of professionalism we just hadn't known. So in 1989, a company called Upper Deck came in and they created an expensive card. Not much else to say about it because they didn't revolutionize the industry, but they showed a potential for a broadened market that we hadn't known before. But it was in 1990. That was the year where the card industry completely changed, because there were four card brands that hit the scene and completely changed the way that we thought of cards. Now, 88 Score, like I said, it really did lay out a template that everybody had to follow moving forward. And these companies were doing that, but what they did was a whole different concept, which was they were rethinking cards, period. And that starts off with Donruss's extra brand called Leaf. In the case of Leaf, they made a whole set that was supposed to go head-to-head with Upper Deck. It was a high-end set, so it was really expensive. And what it showed everybody was, look, you can have a company that has multiple brands that do completely different things. Big deal. In basketball, a company called Skybox came in where they got rid of the background behind the shot of the player and had the player with art behind. This had been something that would happen in inserts, but people really hadn't been doing this in cards for a long time for a base brand. And so this meant, look, the card can be art. So that was a big deal. You also had Action Packed, which was a 3D card. It actually had relief. Well, nobody followed that. But every one of those cards did have a ton of gold foil. That people would pick up on. So those three cards really provided a lot of options moving forward. But the card that shook everybody up at the level of 88 Score was 1990 Pro Set Football. This card had what was called a half bleed, which means that two of the borders is gone, the image just runs off either side. And what's really significant about this is that in order to do that effectively so it looks good, you have to have a very complex cutting process. So that would be an expensive card, right? Because it takes extra work. Well, that was the thing. No, these were basic cards. These were the cheap cards. So if the cheap cards look better than the expensive cards, that tells everybody, look, the bar, it's up here. And everybody would react. So by 1991, the card industry completely changed. And that was what happened in the 90s. Every year, new innovations. Every 2 years, the card industry looked nothing like it had 2 years before. Constantly renewing, reviving. It was crazy. It was amazing, and it was unsustainable. The amount of innovation that happened in that decade is really difficult to wrap your head around. But it was also difficult to maintain for the companies. So by the end of the decade, they had to just call it quits, step back, and refocus and say, okay, what are cards going to be? And they came up with 6 things that would define cards, or more correctly, they settled on 6 elements that define cards, starting with rookies, a predominant emphasis on rookies. This would really be a heavy defining. Well, these all define cards moving forward. They also loved parallels. Oh man, they loved parallels in the new millennium. They also added serial numbering. Now this is something, all of these had already been developed in the 90s. They already existed. But now serial numbering, this was critical for every single brand. They also got a heavy emphasis on autographs. Autographs became enormous. And we're not just talking like inserts. These were in sets. Also jersey swatches. For some reason, people love jersey swatches. I don't get it, but hey, that's fine if that's what they want. And boy, do they want that. Again, in sets. The last thing was different levels of rarity in sets. So you can collect part of the set at a basic level, but then you have extra tiers that you chase after within the set. So if you want to get the whole set, buckle up. It's going to take a lot of work. That's it. That was what defined New Millennium cards for the last, at this point, 22 years. There hasn't really been innovation. It's just been recycling the same thing. So it's going to be interesting to see how we move forward from this. But that's basically what happened in cards. That's the history. Did I skip over a few things? Heck yeah, I did. And if you really want to get into it, vintage, there are a lot of people out there talking about vintage. Buckle up, you're going to have to take notes. Vintage is a crazy affair to get into. There's a lot that goes on because there was a lack of rigidity. Now, if you want to know about the 90s, you can make an entire YouTube channel on the 90s. I know, I have. If you want to know about new cards, well, guess what? The rest of us do too. So there's a lot to learn about cards. And for myself, I do long form journalism, so buckle up. I really do get into it. That's my take. But there are a lot of places out there to learn things about cards. But really at the core, the main thing to know about cards, whether you delve deep into it or whether it's just kind of a surface treatment, understand this. The most important thing about cards is this. If you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. Other than that, I hope that you explore cards and really have fun with it however you want. And I hope that you find the areas that you can get into where you can really enjoy learning about cards, because it is a blast. And take it from me, it's an endless affair of learning, which is great. So thank you very much for watching. And again, have fun.